So this week's theme is culture and clash, because we will present a historical view of Fabergé and his creations for the Russian royalty. And we're also going to focus on Ukraine's folk art Pysanka masterpieces. So the Fabergé eggs are the jeweled eggs that come from the House of Fabergé in St. Petersburg. And the Pysanka are Polish-Ukrainian decorative Easter eggs, usually made with a wax resin. These two art movements and forms are evidence of two cultures with similarities, but that are ultimately very different at heart. Cultures which we are now seeing clash, unfortunately. So what is culture? It's defined as the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a social group or a particular nation. But really, culture encompasses so many different aspects as well. It can be extended to include a code of ethics, dress and fashion, music, language, religion, and so much more. There are larger cultures based on different nations or world regions. And then there are cultures that come from a much smaller level. For example, the culture of a certain hobby like knitting, or the culture of a specific neighborhood like Beverly Hills, for example. So when we think about the cultures of Russia and Ukraine, there are similarities, of course, but also many clashes. One in particular being wealth. If we think about the time that the House of Fabergé began around 1842, the Romanovs in Russia were living with wealthy splendor and power. Nicholas I was in power as the Emperor of Russia, King of Poland, and Grand Duke of Finland. Ukrainian farmers, on the other hand, were responsible for 60% of the wheat for Europe at the time. So they were a powerhouse of agriculture and farming. And Ukrainians focused their attention on creating masterpieces with nature's resources. So who was Fabergé? Or should I say, what is the background on the House of Fabergé, founded in 1842 in St. Petersburg? And we'll learn in our upcoming presentation from management consultants Ian Van Son. Fabergé was foremost a businessman. He employed different artists. And then following Ian will be management consultant Paul Kodik, who himself is second generation Ukrainian. And he'll tell us about the artistic process and the results of how these Pysanka eggs are made and the dyeing method for them. Both Ian and Paul are regular contributors to our town halls. Ian has presented on the history of Inauguration Day, Lafayette, and the Star-Spangled Banner. And Paul has talked about the French history of absinthe, fireworks, and the history of Veterans Day. Now on to you, Ian.
Thanks, Sarah. That's exactly right about the wealthy splendor of the Romanovs, as we'll see. I will share my screen and talk to you a little bit about the House of Fabergé. So this is a little interesting background on the family. So this is the father of the famous Fabergé, but the founder of the jewelry house, who, as you can see on this map, where he came from. So he was actually German, a Baltic German jeweler, born in a city there, Perna, which is today in Estonia, but at that time was in the Russian Empire, and is a place that's been in part of a couple different countries and areas over time as well, in the historical area known as Livonia. His father had moved there from Germany, but there was a community of ethnic Germans living there. So they were just, they were joining Germans that were already there. But interestingly, as his name would suggest, Fabergé, he's actually descended originally from French Huguenots that had fled religious persecution in France centuries earlier. But at the time when the Fabergé house was being founded, these were Baltic Germans living in Russia on the shores of the Baltic Sea. So Gustav trained to be a jeweler, worked as an apprentice, and after qualifying as a master, started the jewelry house, the jewelry store, House of Fabergé, in St. Petersburg. So this is his son, Peter Carl Fabergé, who is the one who really took it to great heights. Had the title goldsmith to the imperial court. So He was born in St. Petersburg after the jewelry store had been opened by his father, attended a German school in St. Petersburg until his father actually retired and moved the whole family back to Germany, leaving the business to his business partner. And Carl, as he was called, continued his studies in Germany before going on a grand tour of Europe, traveling and studying, doing apprenticeships for 8 years before returning to Petersburg and beginning to work in the store, his father's old store, eventually taking over the company and earning the title Master Goldsmith. But as Sarah indicated, it grew into much more than just a jewelry shop. It grew into a workshop that he was overseeing with many artisans working in it. And at this time, the firm really began to move from producing just jewelry to really becoming artists to jewelers. And they found great success, which led to even greater successes to follow at an exhibition held in Moscow in 1882, where their work caught the eye of the Tsar, Alexander III. And that led to the eggs. So in 1885, Tsar Alexander commissioned the House of Fabergé to make an Easter egg as a gift for his wife. This was known as the hen egg. As you can see, in this case, the egg contains the hen. So I think you could say that the egg came first. She liked it so much, apparently, that Fabergé was commissioned to make an Easter egg as a gift for the Tsar's wife every year thereafter. So he had won the ultimate client here, a real golden goose. And apparently he allegedly had complete creative control. And it was sort of a surprise every year to the Tsar himself, even what he was gonna get. And they became increasingly elaborate. But as you can see here, something they have in common is they generally all contain some sort of surprise. So this is the first one. And some pieces are missing, but it has treasures inside. It's kind of like those little chocolate Kinder eggs with toys that are inside them, but on a far fancier scale. And this became a tradition. And even after Tsar Alexander died in 1894, his son, Nicholas II, continued the tradition, giving a Fabergé egg to his mother, the Dowager Empress, every year, as well as to his own wife. So then, the House of Fabergé was making 2 eggs for each Easter per year. And altogether, they were 50 imperial eggs created by the House of Fabergé. So I want to share a couple of these really impressive creations, and you'll see how extravagant they became. So this one commemorates the coronation of Nicholas II and his wife following the death of his father. And you can just see the jewels that are all over it, and it contained this miniature copy of the carriage that they rode around in on their coronation. It's quite extravagant. This is, I think, it must be maybe the largest of the creations, which represents the cathedral of the Uspensky Cathedral in the Kremlin, where at one point all the Russian czars were crowned. So he's kind of taken some artistic license here to sort of represent the Kremlin there, with this egg kind of representing the dome of the cathedral placed on top of it. The dome is removable, and actually that second picture from the left is looking down from above at the Kremlin buildings once the egg has been taken off. Probably want to be careful taking the big egg off of the church walls. You don't want to drop it and have a Humpty Dumpty situation. But it's very intricate, and you can sort of peer through the window of the dome egg to see the inside, the interior of the church. But the real surprise in this one is actually that it's a music box. So there's a golden key, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, to wind it up, and it plays Easter hymns. And this has kind of an interesting history too, because this egg actually commemorated the return to Moscow of the imperial couple. They had been away for some time because during their coronation, see the previous egg, there had been a big disaster with crowds, large crowds trampling people, and a lot of people died. So it was actually kind of taken as it was a big tragedy and seen as a bit of an ominous sign for a bad omen for the reign of the new Tsar. And given how Nicholas ended up, that there might have been something to that. This is a really, I think, a really cool one with a model. It's almost like a ship in a bottle, except here it's a ship in an egg. And in this case, it is a replica of a Russian Navy cruiser that the then Crown Prince Nicholas cruised around Asia along with his brother George on. This was sort of his training to become czar, was to visit far reaches of the empire. And so this is probably fond memories of that for him. And this is, I think, moving from the sea to the land. This is one to commemorate the Trans-Siberian Railway, which was, when this egg was created, was nearing completion. It has a map engraved around it showing all the stations marked with precious stones, and it's really cool. You can see at the top how it folds up and goes into the egg. That's the surprise, but you take it out, unfold it, you've got a locomotive, and then apparently you can wind it up with a key and the train will run. So like I said, these are really extravagant and really cool little creations that they, I'm sure the workshop had a lot of fun working on. So briefly back to the House of Fabergé. Fabergé, he hits the big time. He has opened up, so his major workshops are in Moscow and St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg being the headquarters, which makes sense. It's staying close to the Tsar, and he employed more than 500 craftsmen by the end of the 19th century. But in addition, other branches opened up, including those ones on the right. You can see London, Kyiv, Moscow. Also in Odessa, but that building where the workshops and store were on the left in St. Petersburg is still there today. So it's not the House of Fabergé anymore, but the building still exists, as you can see in that modern picture in the middle. And Fabergé, the House of Fabergé, they didn't, so he didn't put his eggs all in one basket. Rather, they did more than just create these imperial Easter eggs. And here's some examples of many of the luxury items that they produced. So you can see silverware, cigarette lighters on the top left. That's a cigarette case. In the middle is a tiara that was made for the royal family, actually using diamonds given by one of the previous czars to Empress Josephine after her divorce from Napoleon. So they worked on other things, and also, not surprisingly, others saw these imperial Easter eggs and liked the idea. So the Fabergé actually created some for others as well. So this pink one is an example of another one. This is the Rothschild egg, which sold at auction in 2007 for almost 9 million pounds. And on the right, you can see some pictures of the workshop on the bottom right, and the store on the top right. So yeah, as I mentioned, there were 50 eggs created, but some of them are still missing. Part of this has to do with, I think, chaos that ensued after the Russian Revolution. So this is an interesting story where there's the third imperial Easter egg actually suddenly resurfaced, about 10 years ago, when an unidentified scrap metal dealer bought it at a market in the U.S. in the Midwest for a little under $14,000. Buying it for the parts, and then was sort of disappointed to realize he didn't think he could get more than that for the parts. And ended up doing an internet search and realizing that actually the sum of its parts it was worth far more than the actual materials. So that turned into a very good day for him or whoever it was, and it ended up being sold privately for millions. Nobody knows how it wound up in the U.S. at this market, but there are still 6 others out there missing. So if you can come across one, maybe there's another one in the U.S. It could turn into a really great day. And finally, you're probably wondering, where can I see some of these Fabergé eggs? Well, it turns out there's actually a bunch of them in the U.S. So here's a list of where you can see some of them in museums. There's some that are privately held, but a lot of them can be found in museums. So the two on the right are in Washington, D.C., at the Hillwood Estate, which was the home of Marjorie Merriweather Post, the serial heiress, who was a collector of art with particular interest. There's many other pieces of Fabergé creations in the Hillwoods collection, but these are the imperial Easter eggs that she got a hold of. So yeah, as a serial heiress, she certainly had the funds to shell out for fine goods like this. And one of her husbands, interestingly, was also an ambassador to the Soviet Union in the 30s. And another surprise, you wouldn't necessarily think about it, but great place where there's quite a few of them is in Richmond at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And that's thanks to Lillian Thomas Pratt, who was the wife of a GM executive who in the 30s and 40s assembled a collection of a lot of Russian decorative art objects, including over 170 connected to Fabergé, and left her collection to this museum in Richmond. So there you have it. There's there are ones to be found that you can see, and there's others that are out there that are missing that you might be able to find. And with that, I will turn things over to Paul Kodak, who's going to talk about a different type of egg.
Different eggs. Thanks, Ian, and thank you, Sarah, for the nice introductions. Our eggs that I'm going to talk about are a lot less shiny than the Fabergé eggs, but have a storied history nonetheless. So let me share my screen and we can get started. Alrighty, so Pysanka eggs are traditional Easter eggs. They're traditional folk designs, and the Pysanka are made with a wax resist method. It's called batik. So we'll get into how the wax is applied and how the dyeing happens. But the word Pysanka actually comes from the Ukrainian verb pisati, which is to write. And it's really because the eggs aren't designed by paints. They aren't, the shells aren't painted with any oil-based paints. They're actually inscribed with beeswax and then dyed. And the beeswax allows you to dye various layers of color onto the egg while protecting the colors under the wax. Now, the history of Pysanka goes back fairly far. It's likely that the art of decorating eggs dates back well before the Christian era. And historians believe that because the practice is so widespread throughout the Slavic region. Now, unfortunately, no examples of actual intact Pysanka exist because the eggs are very fragile and don't hold up well to time. But fragments of those colored shells, particularly with the wax decoration on them, have been unearthed, particularly in excavations of settlements in Western Ukraine and in Poland. Now, many of the symbols used in the art are also pre-Christian, and that's because they were used in pagan cultures to represent, natural and mystical elements that villagers and the civilization knew at the time. So ancestral Ukrainians and Poles, like a lot of other ancient cultures, worshiped a sun god named Dajbo. And that's because the sun was very important to them. It warmed the earth and it was the source of life in the culture. And birds are actually the sun god's chosen creations because they were the only creatures who could get near to him. And since humans couldn't catch birds in the sky, they went to the ground. They focused on obtaining eggs that birds laid. And therefore the eggs were actually viewed as kind of mystical, magical objects. They were a source of life, and they were honored during festivals like Rite of Spring festivals, which really celebrated the rebirth of the earth after very long, harsh winters, particularly in that region. Now, eggs, because they were viewed as magical and mystical, they were believed to have special powers, and they were decorated with symbols to really serve as talismans. In the pagan religions, these talismans gave eggs magical powers, whether it be to ward off evil, whether it's to banish winter, to guarantee a good harvest, or even just to bring a person good luck. That's really the main point behind the pisanki as an object. Now, it actually got to the point that there are various legends around pisanki, and they vary in degrees, have been adapted to the Christian religion and Christian folklore. But in one extreme instance, the fate of the world actually depends on decorated eggs. The Hostels in Western Ukraine believe that if the custom of creating pisanki is ever abandoned, that evil, which takes the shape of a giant serpent chained to a cliff, if it's ever abandoned, then this evil will overrun the world. So each year, the serpent sends out his minions to see how many pisanki have actually been written that year. And if the number is low, the serpent's chains are loosened. He's free to wander and cause havoc around the world. But on the other hand, if the number of pisanki is high, if it's increased, then the chains are tightened and good triumphs over evil for another year. So we must have a lot of pisanki these years, since we haven't seen many snakes wandering around the world. However, after Ukraine adopted Christianity in the 10th century, the pisanki tradition and the legends involved really adapted to fit the new religion. So the rebirth of the earth in springtime was transformed to represent the rebirth of Christ during Easter time. And that's why we have them primarily as an Easter-focused object, and to carry on the Easter tradition. Now, as far as the folklore behind the pisanki goes and the traditions involved, some of them are very much still active. Pisanki are made to be given as gifts to family members, to people in the community that are respected. And to give the gift of a pisanka is really to give a symbolic gift of life, which is why you give the pisanka as a whole egg, not as a cracked egg. Now, typically, pisanki were displayed in homes prominently in a public room. And for large families, each year by Holy Thursday, which is actually today, the Thursday before Good Friday, leading into the Easter weekend, by this point, dozens of eggs would be have been made by the women of the house. So the more daughters a family had, the more eggs than they would have made. And the eggs were taken to church on Easter Sunday and sometimes before Easter Sunday to be blessed. And then after they're blessed, they're given away. So how are they actually given away? You've got dozens of eggs. They're decorated beautifully. An example of how they may have been distributed around the community. So one, you've got to give a couple of eggs to the priest who's blessing them. The priest in the community blesses the Easter baskets, which you can see in this picture. These have all of the foods of the Easter meal, pascha, breads, other eggs that are actually for consumption, kielbasa. The priest gets a couple of nice decorative eggs from each person he blesses their baskets for. Some of your other eggs you would take to the cemetery, place them on graves of your family members as signs of respect and of memory. Pisanki were given to really all of the children in the community, all the godchildren that you may have. Make sure that everyone has their talisman for good fortune, good luck, and good blessing. And then unmarried girls within the family would actually exchange pisanki with any of the eligible bachelors in the community. So they would give these likely adorned with some symbology for hearts, any symbols of love. However, it was said that a girl should never give her boyfriend or a bachelor a pisanki that has no design on the top or the bottom of the egg. And this is because it might signify that the boyfriend would soon lose his hair. But that didn't get rid of all of the eggs that were made. So pisanki were also placed in mangers of the cows, horses, to ensure any safe calving, any births in the springtime, as well as in the pastures for all of the grazing animals to protect them. And then finally, you would place pisanki under the beehives to ensure that there's a good production of honey and the wax that you'll use to make the next year's pisanki, as well as the nests of the hens to encourage good egg laying for the year, both for consumption and for the next year's decoration. So everyone got them. The youngest to the oldest in the community received pisanki. And because everyone received them, bowls full of them were displayed and able to be displayed throughout the house. One as a nice decorative adornment to the home, but also to protect from all the dangers that they're meant to. So how are these pisanki actually decorated? There are various symbols and motifs that are designed around the eggs that you can see. There's no two eggs alike, but a lot of the designs tend to carry. So due to the history of the whole tradition, the symbols, the meanings behind the symbols can vary from region to region. They can vary from village to village. They can even vary from family to family, depending on, you know, the matriarchal lineage and what they decided at the time that a symbol may mean. But that being said, there are common symbols that are used throughout the practice, both in ancient pagan times and today. And colors and designs all are meant to serve a purpose, whatever that may be. So geometric designs are most common. This is because you essentially use the straight lines to divide the egg into triangles, into squares, into other shapes that are able to be inscribed a bit more easy, but carry very considerable symbology. So triangles can represent any power of three, whether that be earth, water, and fire, birth, life, and death, or for a Christian tradition, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Additionally, in geometric designs, anything with spiral motifs were very powerful. Legend says that demons or unholy creatures could be trapped in those spirals forever when they entered a home. You start to get on and see more complicated designs. So because of the history of the tradition and because it's ancient, cosmomorphic designs are very popular. They represent any celestial objects, the sun, the moon, stars, and any power and myth that comes with that. But then you also see more terrestrial symbolism. Phytomorphic are representations of any healing and springful aspects of plants, while the zoomorphic symbols were supposed to bring some power of the animal that's represented. Or a portion of the animal that's represented. You could have the tooth of a wolf or the eye of a bull for strength, the comb of a rooster to represent masculinity, or a full depiction artistically of a hen to represent maternal good fortune. Going on from the more natural symbology, there's actually more cultural symbology. Because Ukraine, as was said before, is such a agricultural based society, the skeuomorphic symbols really abound. And these are symbols that represent man-made agricultural tools. An interesting word specifically for that, but that's the word nonetheless. Now these tools and the symbols were used to represent good harvest, safety in work, safety on the field, and really for a community so agriculturally focused as Ukrainian communities, very important symbols. So the pagan symbols that you saw earlier really developed into Christian symbols. While some representations of the pagan pantheon, some of the multiple gods fell out of popularity, some Christian symbols actually were generated. Ones that weren't translated from pagan symbols, but came up from actual Christianity, such as crucifixes or churches. So eternity bands, color symbolism, everything is on the egg to symbolize something, whether it be, the color of wisdom, the color of life, or even of death. And one myth within Ukrainian is really, you give older people more adorned, decorated pisanki with darker colors, rich designs as their life has been filled. And you give young people white, primarily pisanki, because their life is a blank page and there's still a lot of living to do. Now, there are various steps in creating the pisanki. I know we're running on time, so I'll go through them quickly. You need all of your tools. You need your eggs, whether that be small bird's eggs, quail's eggs, or ostrich eggs. Chicken eggs do just fine. First, you ream them to get the insides out and have a hollow shell. You cover the hollow shell with waxes and then start your inscription of your base design. And then you take this tool called the kistka, which is a pen that you fill with warm beeswax that will flow in order to inscribe the designs and begin the dyeing process. So the pens have different flow rates for either detail design or for filler design. But as you dye each level, the new beeswax will protect that color. And again, you typically dye from light to dark. You can see here the designs get very intricate with the pen. So a small flow rate covering it with waxes is very important. Any of the designs, or excuse me, the dyes that you use, they can be all natural dyes, like from beets or onions, coffee, cabbages. But again, they're all put on the egg to represent what you may want them to represent in order to achieve your design and the intended symbology behind it. Now, unlike Fabergé, there aren't many museums that hold pisanki that are well known throughout the world, but there is one. And hopefully in more peaceful times, you may be able to go visit it. It's the Pysanka Museum in Kolomia, Ukraine, Western Ukraine. That 13-meter high egg, probably structure-bearing architecture, holds within it thousands of different pisanki from different oblasts in Ukraine, all over Ukraine and all over the world. And I hope one day I'm able to go there as well. But regardless of your Easter tradition, depending on how many eggs it may involve and how decorated those eggs are, I hope that you all have a very happy Easter and that you understand and appreciate a bit more the design and the history involved in pisanki. Thanks, everyone.
Two egg spectacular presentations,
Right.
weren't they?
They were
They were.
fantastic.
All right. Well, hey, thank you to Nicole, Greg, Darren, Chuck, Peter, Sarah, Ian, and Paul. And of course, to our tech crew who makes it all happen behind the magic curtain.